see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Hey guys, what is up? Welcome back to the Spiritual Gangsters podcast. It is me, Teresa, and I am very excited for this episode because I am joined by two amazing people, wonderful researchers and friends. I've got Nick from the Occult Rejects and Lisa, the mad scientist of the Occult Rejects. So thank you so much, guys, for joining me today. Of course, Nick, do you want to quickly tell people about, your stuff, and then we'll bring it over to Lisa.
Sure. People can check out the Occult Rejects on BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, and all major podcasts. That's basically about it.
Awesome. And Miss Lisa, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Solis Lisa, or on Instagram, Lisa Solis.
Amazing. Wonderful. You're too busy to have your own podcast and deal with actual school. Because you're super smart. She's literally one of the smartest people I know.
No, not at all.
No, but I am really happy that we can make this happen because I personally have a big fascination with what we're going to talk about today, which is Marian apparition. The one in particular today is Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I've personally been really fascinated with these since I was a little girl. So it's important to me to I want to for the Spiritual Gangsters this year, make it a goal to do a little series on these apparitions. So this would be the first one. We'll see how many can actually get done, but thank you guys for joining me on this. So we'll just bring up that first slide, I guess, so we can get started. But yeah, so today we're talking about Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a Marian apparition that happened in Mexico. And I think another reason why I really wanted to bring these forward is because, number one, no other person in the conspiracy community is going to. I feel.
That's funny.
I really don't think that's a thing. I just don't think people are that aware maybe of the topic. But I do think it's important to talk about because a lot of Marian apparitions actually relate to warning about Marxism, communism, messages that are important to our current time. So I think it's relevant to bring to the discussion. Plus, they're also just supernatural and freaky and cool, and the symbolism is deep, and I'm into all that. So I'm happy about it. But yeah, so in this particular apparition, basically, and when I say a Marian apparition, in case people don't know, what it means is that Mary, Jesus's mom, appears to somebody or gives them a message in some way. So that's what it means in a supernatural manner. So they believe that they are seeing her, up front and personal, or that she is giving them a message in there that they can hear auditorily, like how I'm talking right now. So this particular one, the main message given was that, there's just a quick quote from it. It says, "Know and understand well, you, the most humble of my son, that I am the ever virgin Holy Mary, mother of the true God for whom we live, of the creator of all things, Lord of heaven and the earth. I wish that a temple to be erected here quickly," where she appeared, "so that I may therein exhibit and give all my love, compassion, help, and protection, because I am your merciful mother. To you and to all the inhabitants of this land and all the rest who love me, invoke and confide in me, listen there to their lamentations and remedy all of their miseries, afflictions, and sorrows." Because at the time, it was a little bit of a tumultuous period of history in Mexico. But yeah, I think Miss Lisa is going to get into a little bit of that for us now.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of go through the little quick storyline of it and then expand upon the story itself, and then kind of give some inserts of what was happening with Spain and then what was happening with the Conquest, just kind of briefly to kind of set the stage, because I think it's important once you see the actual image and when we start talking about the symbolism, you start to understand why there was so much symbolism and why it was directed to the Aztec people.
Perfect, yes.
So the general storyline is that in the month of December of 1531, there was a series of 5 Marian apparitions, 4 that would occur to Juan Diego and 1 to his uncle Juan Bernardino. And they all, well, the 4 occurred on the hill of Tepeyac, and now it's known as Villa de Guadalupe, which is like an outside suburb of Mexico City. So according to the Nican Mopua, and I'm going to butcher all of these words, so I apologize. And I believe Nick's going to cover this in more detail. But the Virgin basically appeared to these Mexican Chichimec peasants. They're indigenous, Native American to this area, and specifically to Juan Diego, who was born in 1474, and then once to his uncle, who is also Chichimec. The first apparition is going to happen on Saturday morning, December 9th, 1531. Correct me if I'm wrong with any of this. And I believe they said that's part of the Julian calendar. The Gregorian calendar has her appearing December 19th. So again, I think it depends who and which calendar you're using.
Mm-hmm.
But so the Chichimecs people were actually like, that name was applied to them by the Spanish because they were generally nomadic and semi-nomadic. And they were referred to as Chichimec as a way to call them barbarian, as described by the Spanish. And that name was actually assigned to the Germanic tribes. And it was almost like a pejorative assigning of that name. And it meant that they had no fixed dwelling space. They lived by hunting, wore little clothing, fiercely resisted the intrusion of their land. And this land specifically had like numerous silver mines. So that was also, very wanted by the Spanish. So of course there was that resistance, and it was called the area of milk by the people of that area. They practiced human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, and they were pretty experts in war. So on this morning, Juan Diego gets to Tepeyac Hill, and the hill becomes symbolic because that's where pretty much all of it takes place. And he notices a bright light shining down from the heavens, and birds start singing. And immediately he thinks he's in heaven, because in their belief system, birds singing indicates they're in heaven. It's like the second realm or something like that. And it's a paradise of their ancestors. And so, and in this area, it's a place where flowers are constantly blooming. So when he starts hearing birds singing, it's almost like, wait, what's going on? I'm dead. Like I must have passed away or something like that. And then he hears the hill answering the birds back. And then he's like, oh, for sure. Like I'm done for, and then that is broken by silence when he hears a woman call out his name in Nahuatl, which is the native tongue of the people there, not in Spanish, not in Latin, but in the actual language of the indigenous tribe. And she calls him by his name. And so that already, in a sense, they are called barbaric, they're treated as barbarians. And then for the lady to be speaking in the native tongue was a big deal. So he travels up, he sees the woman, and she immediately tells him that, I'm the Virgin Mary, the mother of the one true God. And this is considered the first apparition itself. And there's this long narration that happens between Mary and Juan Diego. And it's further encapsulated in that Nican Mopua. And it's apparently like some of the most beautiful dialogue, like intense poetry. And Nahuatl isn't a poetic language. So that in of itself is also a big deal. And it's the blending of the Nahuatl thought with a Christian message. So then we start to see the bridging between the two cultures or the two belief systems. So the woman tells Juan Diego that he needs to go to the archbishop and tell him everything he sees and hears. So he leaves, goes to the current archbishop. He was already on his way to the church. I think he was going to do catechism or something like that. And it was like a 4-hour trek. And this is when he encounters the Virgin. And then he leaves to the church itself, and he comes to the Archbishop Juan de Zumarraga. And he starts telling the Archbishop about the bird singing, about the hill singing, and the woman and everything. And this guy's like, okay, this guy's off his rocker. This is not even real. Right. And so I think the Archbishop was very kind and like pastorally says, oh, that's a very nice story. Maybe you can come back tomorrow and tell me all about it later or something like that. Right. So Juan Diego leaves defeated, right? Because, here he is, this peasant, telling Archbishop what happened, and then he doesn't believe him. So he leaves and then kind of goes back through the same trek and encounters the Virgin again. And he tells her, send somebody else. Like, I'm a nobody. Like, he's not going to listen to me. Like, just pick someone else. And she literally says, no, I need it to be you. It has to be you. You have to be my ambassador or whatever. And so if you look at the actual name of Juan Diego in Nahuatl, it means eagle, or one who speaks like an eagle. And for them, the eagle meant the deity of the sun, which for them, the sun was the highest ranking god. So the whole, I need it to be you, you speak like an eagle, your name is spoken like an eagle. It's one of those things where you're like, it's all falling into place. And that name was given to him before the Spanish got there. And I think the Spanish got there in 1531 and the apparition, 1531, and the apparitions happened in 1531 to Mexico. The Hernan Cortés and all of them got there at that point. And so he goes back the next morning, at the request of the Virgin, and tells the Archbishop, look, she's telling me to tell you this is happening. She wants a church built, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay, ask her for like a legitimate sign, and then I'll believe her. And so he leaves and says, okay, fine, I'll go and tell her that. So the Archbishop does some reconnaissance of his own. It's like, okay, what's going on? What is Tepeyac Hill? Who is this person? Is he legitimate? And kind of figures that out. And he finds out that Tepeyac Hill was an actual hill where a pyramid was, and they worshipped a female goddess deity or something like that. And she was the deity that had dominion over the serpents. Ooh. So then we're starting to see how snakes are coming into play with, the Virgin and all that other stuff. Yeah. And then she is the one that emerges from the fire in the light like an eagle. So then we have the phoenix symbolism. So of course the Archbishop was like, no. They want me to erect a temple. It's for a pagan god. I'm not doing it. I'll just wait for the sign. Probably won't even happen. So in all this, let me kind of give a little bit of backstory who Juan de Zumarraga is. So Hernan Cortés gets to Mexico, right? And it's only like a few hundred men. And before this happens, Halley's Comet had flown over. And so for the Aztecs, the comet symbolized this was going to be the end of the 52-year cycle. So it was going to be the end of that era and the birth of another one. And so, and there was talk about Quetzalcoatl coming back at the end of that actual era. Okay. So Hernan Cortés shows up. He's a white guy. In the legend of Quetzalcoatl, he's a white guy. So here comes this man with a beard, coming from the Orient, right, from the east side. Yeah. That he would put all the gods in their place, and that he didn't participate in the eating of flesh, which Quetzalcoatl didn't either. And then I believe he was on this beast animal, right, which wasn't seen in the Americas at that point. So they're thinking, okay, this is a god, this is whatever. So they start sending the Aztec people start sending gifts to Hernan Cortés, kind of indicating where they are or what have you. And so going back to the Spanish, the Spanish had just come out of the Ottoman rule. I think it was like 8 centuries of their thing. And so they enter into this like very zealous moment in time where they're wanting to push Christianity. They're wanting to conquer places, and to them, their economy's kaput. They need a new place. They hear of the streets paved with gold. They're going to the Americas. They're going to make their claim. So you're having these two types of mindsets coming together at that point. So then when the Spanish were asking the Aztecs who they were and who created you, they're telling them Quetzalcoatl, right? And Quetzalcoatl is the serpent god. So they're like, oh yeah, these people are not good. They're not even people. They come from the serpent. They come from the devil. They're less than human or what have you. And for them, that was great, because if they considered them lower than human, then they really didn't have to, respect them or anything like that. However, on the ships were the Franciscan monks. And the Franciscan monks believed, and I think we covered Francis of Assisi on the Saintly Occultists, they believed, brother moon and sister sun, or brother sun, sister moon, or something like that, to where all creation was equal. And so you had the Franciscans trying to Christianize these indigenous. And the Spanish conquistadors are like, no, don't do that. Because the moment you do that, then we have to recognize them. We have to give them back their land, or we can't take their land. And it just messes everything up for everyone, right? So then you start to have this war with everyone. So Spain sends Juan de Zumarraga, and that's where the archbishop comes into play, where he's like, okay, I'm going to come create order because of this old chaos. And when he gets there, it's full out war. And he's not able to control it or whatever. So he sends word back to the king, and he's like, I need reinforcement or something, or send a sign, or pray to the Virgin Mary or Jesus, because we're going to lose this land. I mean, it's a full out war. This happened the night before Juan Diego shows up at the archbishop's rectory or church.
I didn't even know
according to
that.
legend. Yeah, according to legend. So that's, I know I took you through that whole story, but I was like, I have to kind of set it all up to where it all kind of culminates and comes to a head at this point.
Yeah.
So Juan Diego finally, he basically leaves because he's been sent out by the archbishop for a sign, right? Well, when he leaves, he gets home and his uncle has fallen ill. Right. And so he has to stay and attend to him, take care of him. I think he calls in the curandero or whatever to try to take care of him or whatever. And he has a fever. And the uncle tells him, I don't want to die a pagan. I want to have a priest hear my confession. So at that point, one day I was like, okay, well, let me hike back up the 4 hours, go get a priest and come back. And he's like, damn, I didn't go in the morning to the Virgin to get the sign. She's going to be mad at me or whatever. I'm going to go around the hill on the opposite end. And it's true to form to women. We figure it out, right? And we find out, no. And so she ends up appearing on the opposite side of the hill where he decides to go around and avoid her. And she's like, like, she didn't say what the heck, right? But I mean, she's like, what's going on, right?
Gotcha, buddy.
So, yeah, exactly. And so he immediately apologizes, says, I'm so sorry. My uncle has fallen ill, blah, blah, blah. And she literally says the words that are inscribed in over like the entrance of where the actual tilma is, or the entrance or above the tilma or something like that is inscribed. It's no estoy yo aquí, que soy tu madre. Am I not here that I am your mother? And then goes into this whole thing like, why didn't you employ me? And he's like, well, because my uncle's dying. And she's like, rest assured, your uncle's cured. Your uncle will be fine. And so he's like, okay, well, he needs a sign. I can't go without a sign, blah, blah, blah. And so she tells him, okay, go ahead, go up to the hill and collect some roses up there. And he's like, okay, didn't even question it, just goes. Now, granted, you're in the middle of December. Nothing's growing anywhere, right? And when he gets to the top of the hill, it's Castilian roses, which only grow in South Spain. Now, Juan de Zumarraga is from South Spain. So he would recognize those roses when he sees them, right? And so he collects them, puts them all in the tilma or whatever. So Juan Diego leaves. And she tells him, do not show it to anybody, only to the archbishop. So he leaves, he goes, and there's people there waiting at the entrance of the church. And they're like, well, let me see what you have. And apparently they're trying to dig into the tilma. And they say that the roses look like holograms and they can't grab them, but they can see them. And they got real freaked out. So they go to get the archbishop. And the archbishop immediately comes out and says, what's going on? Now I think he has an audience or something like that. So there's people there when Juan Diego gets there and then opens up the tilma. So he opens it up, pours it out, the roses fall out, and then the image is on the actual tilma. And then we'll get into that. But back home with the uncle, the Virgin appears to him, cures him, and tells him, go to the archbishop, tell him what happened, and tell him I'm called Guadalupe. Now, the whole thing with Guadalupe is that Guadalupe is an Arabic name. Mm-hmm. And that the archbishop would recognize that name because that's exactly where he's from in Spain, which is the town of Guadalupe, the mountain range of Guadalupe. And Guadalupe means core base of the river, the mouth of the river itself, to where all rivers flow out of, or that particular river flows out of.
I think too the word Guadalupe also can be translated Valley of the Wolves or something
Yes,
like that.
and it has a Latin translation. And I
Yeah.
think that's key to because it forms like a bridge. Not only is it Arabic, but it's also Latin. And so when you look at the tilma, not only is it Christian supportive, but it's also Aztec supportive. And then you see and then you hear about the other apparition of the Guadalupe that happened in Spain that was a very near and dear storyline to the Spanish. And so if she were to show that tilma, I don't think that it would have the same significance if the roses weren't there, if the name wasn't there, and there were all these signs that the Archbishop had prayed for the night before Juan Diego shows up. So that's the lore. That's the storyline, right? And so but yeah, that's in a nutshell. Sorry, that was like 20 minutes worth of the story.
That is an amazing recounting of the story because that's awesome. I actually wanted to ask you, Lisa, you have Mexican heritage, right?
Yes,
so
I do.
Growing up, like, was this apparition or the image like prominent in your home or like in your life? Like, if you encountered it before? Yeah,
absolutely, yes. I grew up Catholic. My parents are very devout, and so I don't know if it was more of a symptom of being in South Texas, so close to Mexico, or if it was because we were Hispanic. But La Virgen was almost. I mean, you almost. It sounds bad, but you always pray to La Virgen before you pray to anybody else. And the way that I see it was, at least with the Hispanic family, when you want some, like say for instance, you live in a traditional home, mother and father, and you want to ask your dad for something, but your dad's going to say no. You just know it. You go to your mom first, right? And you're like, dude, totally intercede for me, please. I really want to go to this thing, right?
Yeah, because she'll talk to dad, right?
Yeah, and so she intercedes for you, and that's kind of how we view it. Like she's more like she's got your back type deal. You don't ever think that she's above the father. You don't ever think that she's going to, like supersede him, but she has that. It's more of a motherly type relationship, and the mother is extremely revered in Hispanic culture or Mexican culture. I think in Hispanic altogether, but I think that's true of all like cultures that are close knit families. That the mother is pretty sacred.
I think so. Yeah. And I just want to actually meant to say that in the beginning of the episode that I wanted to make it clear that like people don't get their back up about, oh, this is like a whole Mary is like the ultimate like goddess and this and that. No, we're just like going through this apparition historically, symbolically, and just presenting the information, and I think that is something that a lot of people misconstrue about Catholicism is they think that we worship Mary, blah, blah, blah. We more so venerate, honor, like, because sometimes not to like stir the pot, but sometimes how I hear people speak about Mary, especially like in the Protestant church or non-denominational Christianity, it's actually really like disrespectful. Like, I really hope like you don't talk about your own mom like that. Because
it's I've kind of, and growing up you meet people that are not Catholic, and so they do say, I can't believe that you worship a female god, or I can't believe you whatever X, Y, and Z it is, and of course at an early age you're just like, well, that's just what we do, like I it just wasn't a big deal to me. It's just the way it was. But I will say that I've always thought it was a Hispanic thing, to where we were very much in veneration of the Virgin Mary, especially Guadalupe.
Yeah, I've noticed that just from my friends who are of Hispanic descent, like this particular apparition is like so ingrained in the culture. Less so being Italian Canadian, it's less so like in prominence in my experience growing up, but I have had heard of it a lot growing up for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Historical account. Did you have anything else you wanted to?
No, just, that kind of the whole Tepeyac Hill was one of a place that was worshipped previously by the Aztecs for, she was a goddess of snakes. I think she was like the Medusa. She had the snakes coming out of her head, and the people there, they believe snakes were life. When you cut open a person, all you see is intestines and vessels and blood. So they believe that that snakes made up life, and it was the go between heaven and earth, and it connected you both like an umbilical cord. And so they revered the snake, and Quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent. So it was all encompassing with that. And then for when she shows up, she kind of, and we'll go through it all. I think she has this whole projection of earth and heaven, and she's now the new go-between, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the slides here, if people are watching on video, I just wanted to draw attention on the right side. So in case you don't know what a tilma is, I think we didn't explain that, but basically it's like a cloth garment that people would wear, and they could wear it in different ways. But since Juan Diego was trying to gather the roses, he would have had like the large part in the front so that he could just kind of like bundle it all up in his cloak. And then you see him opening it up in front of the bishop and whatnot on the right side. So, and of course the left side, it's a representation of potentially what may have occurred, right? Yes. Okay. Amazing. And Nick, did you want to go into your stuff there?
There was something I wanted to add about like the imagery and the stuff that you had mentioned something earlier, Lisa. You gave a description of water with her or something associated with water. Yes. And going by like some of the art, I think that we'll touch on later with the stars around her. Mm-hmm. It's very much like the star card. The star tarot card look is very. It has the stars kind of around her. Again, depending on what deck you look at, the Thoth deck, it looks completely different. But other decks still have like the stars around her, and she will be like taking water from like one area and dumping it out to another area. Oh wow! So I think it looks a little bit like that, and even the Empress cards on some tarot decks will even kind of almost have this type of like thing around the feminine, thing being depicted. So I did find that interesting. She is
associated with water because Tepeyac Hill is near the Moon Lake, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And then in Spain, the River of Guadalupe. I mean, the Virgin, for some reason, like what you said with the water symbology and the feminine, it's very much associated with water. Even
like with the roses around her. I could see, like, if you go by, like, the logo that I have now for myself, I have that because of the eclipse. And then, like, the things that I have said that I have seen that kind of look like rose bursts. The Empress card would be right past, Saturn, the third sphere, which is black, and then going over to the other one. So I do wonder, like, that's kind of, in my opinion, still showing the visualization in some way that I'm trying to depict with my logo. With this, some of the art I've seen with this.
Yeah, it's like all connected, right? I like how, Lisa, you're emphasizing that this image in particular really bridges like the different cultures. Like it bridges the, for lack of a better word, like the pagan Aztec culture and Christianity together. Because I do find, there is a lot of overlap, and I love always like Nick's insights into like the esoteric meanings of things because it is all connected, right?
I think so too. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. It's definitely a bridge. And I would say that I would even gander to say to throw in Islam because you'll see some symbology of Islam. And the only one that's not in there that I remember that would be Jewish. Now she was a Jewish girl, right? Historically, but it's that connectivity all across the board. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Amazing.
Another thing I wanted to add even too with, I guess like what I was talking about with the art, then again, does this go back to how I have said, I think there is common markers of people's visualization when they cross the abyss and have an experience with God. And again, is the rose bursts. And you see roses, Rosicrucian, Crowley rose. You see roses used a lot for this stuff. And again, I'm wondering, is that thrown in there to show artistically, I had this legit experience? Because if you've had it too, where the roses come in and you know why you got all this other stuff. Is it a way of you showing artistically markers that you've had this experience and you're legit?
I would agree.
Which is why maybe you see it so often in certain experiences that kind of all sound the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely similar hallmarks of the
Yeah,
experience, right?
yeah, right. Hallmarks,
For
is a good way to
sure.
put it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hallmark.
Okay, Nick,
All right,
do
so
you
I'll go
want to
into
take
my
us
stuff now.
into? No,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to take us into some of the historical documents that support?
Yes.
Okay, sweet.
I'm going to probably butcher this name.
We're
Um,
all we said the least butchering. Me and you, it's gonna be
oh god,
friggin'
horrible.
brutal.
Yeah.
Right?
It's almost like because like I actually like almost don't care either. So like that's the whole problem behind it. It's like whatever. Sorry.
Amazing.
It's
No.
like Huey or Huey Tlama Huey Kolita or Koltika, something like that. But it's the Great Event, and it is a significant track written in the I'm not sure how to say this. Maybe I was hoping Lisa would actually possibly know. New Nahuatl language.
Not wal. Not a wal. Not
Yeah,
wal.
whatever.
Yeah. It's a back TL that gets me every time. But yeah.
And it's 36 pages. It was originally published in Mexico City, Mexico, in 1649 by Luis Lasso de la Vega, who served as the vicar of the chapel of Our Lady of Guadalupe at Tepeyac near the city. While Lasso de la Vega claimed sole authority of the entire work, this assertion remains a point of ongoing scholarly debate. So, I mean, there is, difference of opinions about this. The tract is predominantly composed in that language again. I'm not going to try to pronounce, and features the Nikan Mopohua. And detailing the apparitions of Our Lady of Guadalupe at Tepeyac in 1531. Additionally, it contains the again that Nikan has the Nikan Motekpana, which catalogs the miracles attributed to some individuals, notably neither Luis Lasso de la Vega nor Antonio Vallarino are explicitly mentioned as authors. So that's another thing too. This is like, I guess, possibilities.
Multiple authors.
Yeah. The traditions recounted in the 1649 tract were first published in the Spanish book Imagen de la Virgen Maria, Madre de Dios de Guadalupe. And that translates into the image of the Virgin Mary, Mother of God of Guadalupe. And written by Miguel Sanchez in 1648. This theological dissertation links the Guadalupan image of Revelation 12:1. Yes. And then preceding the Nikan Mophoia, or Mapohua, sorry. There exists a shorter manuscript in that same language again, titled The Inan Huey. I'm not even going to try to finish pronouncing this. Translates to This is the Great Marvel. Also known as the primitive relation of the apparitions. This manuscript can be found in the National Library of Mexico. The responsibility for the composition and authorship of that last one I wasn't even going to try to pronounce, the This is the Great Marvel, that one, is commonly attributed to, again, Luis Lasso de la Vega, who was the vicar of the chapel at Tepeyac, according to many contemporary scholars and historians. While it is suggested that, I'm just going to call him de la Vega, might have had collaborators in creating the work, due to the lack of substantial material evidence, it remains uncertain whether one or more individuals contributed to the construction of that text. Originally published in 1649, the work was released under the supervision of Dr. Pedro de Barrientos Lomelin, who was Vicar General of the Mexican Diocese at the press of Juan Ruiz. So Ron Ruiz basically was who printed it out, I guess, after was given the release or permission by that guy.
Wow.
Codex Escalada, also known as Codex 1548, is a valuable piece of parchment bearing a date of 1548. It showcases intricate images drawn in the European style with accompanying that Nahuatl text portraying the Marian apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe to Juan Diego. These visions are said to have taken place on 4 occasions. December 1531 on Tepeyac Hill, situated north of central Mexico City. The authenticity and probable dating of the document to the mid-16th century, based on preliminary tests, prove crucial insights into the historical tradition surrounding the Guadalupe apparitions and the revered image of the Virgin Mary associated with the 4th encounter. Discovered in 1995, this remarkable parchment was brought to public attention by, I guess the FR is probably Friar, Xavier Escalada in 2002, consolidating its significance in religions and historical context. And then that's really what I got on that until we get to the music.
Well, it's pretty interesting that there is like historical documentation at all. Like I mean, there's of course always like questions we could say or controversy around writing things after the fact. But I mean, it seems like they did try to preserve the story as best as they could, right?
I think so. I think they also had an oral tradition as well. And so they were learned in the oral tradition versus now, if you tell somebody something, they'll forget. But yeah.
Can't even remember our own phone numbers anymore. Yeah.
But I think that's what I think. And that was predominantly what Europe and Northern Africa and Middle East did too, right, Nick? That there was the oral traditions predominantly before everything started being written down.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I mean, that's like, especially when you get into like Italian, like occultism and magic. I mean, it's so hard to really get much. I forget the specific name for it. It starts with an S. But I mean, it's so much of like an oral tradition. It's like really hard to find anything like of deep or worth value in books.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oral tradition's almost more important, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Sometimes. All right. So I think since we have like a really good grasp on the history and like the documentation, should we get into some of the symbolism of the tilma itself? Okay. All right. Let me bring up, I think it's, you want to just start with that image there?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then, Lisa, do you want to control the slides while you're talking about
the
images? So you can just like flip as you
yes, absolutely.
speak, right? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm probably going to skip around, just FYI, on some of the stuff because I have some pictures on whatever. So the image of the lady appears today as it did in 1531. There not much has changed. And she refers to herself as Guadalupe. And we spoke about how in Arabic means hidden river or core river. And then Latin, it also means Valley of the Wolf. And it was from Extremadura, where the bishop was from, where Hernan Cortés was from, all of that symbology kind of linking the two back. One of the things that I wanted, and I didn't mention, was so the Virgin Mary that appeared in Spain, she's considered the Black Madonna. The Virgin Mary that appeared in Guadalupe or in Mexico was what we call mestiza, meaning she was of mixed breed, right? She had both white and Indian in her. And so she has this like dark complexion that's more indigenous than it is white. And that was a big deal to kind of bridge that back. Right. With the Aztec people. The other thing was that, so we talked about Juan Diego and how his name was associated with the sun god, highest of all gods, name given, and what happened. Okay, so with the tilma, and I'm going to go ahead and skip forward with some of this, and we can come back to this. I'm sorry.
No, go for
skipping
it.
forward. So when we talked about this, how this was...
When you're done, please just make sure you go back to the first one. I do want to add something to that. I just don't want to...
Okay. Yeah. So this is where the Extremadura in Spain was. I just kind of wanted to give the reference point to that. So when we talked about Juan Diego himself. Okay, so Juan Diego's tilma. The tilma itself is a piece of clothing, and you touched on that at the beginning, that it's made from fibers from the agave maguey plant. And so if you take the leaves off and inside, remove the fleshy part from the inside, you have a bunch of fibers inside. And so with these fibers, they're done, they're comb washed, and then they're laid out in the sun. Here comes the sun, right? The sun symbolism all over again.
Yeah.
And you expose them and you can make yarn out of them. And from this yarn, you get like a very coarse yarn that's called ayate fibers. And they're strung together and it's made into a very sturdy type of piece of clothing, what they call a tilma. And the pagans wear it over themselves to also carry, whether they were using it to carry stuff or for tilling, not tilling, what do you call it? When planting, they're carrying stuff, or they're, we call it cosecha when you were gathering as well. But the main part of this is that it's almost impossible to paint on it, because the fiber is so coarse. So to even have the smallest detail of anything, it's almost near impossible in and of itself. So that for sure is one thing to mention with that. The other thing was that there was a German biochemist in Richard Kuhn, I believe his name was, and he did molecular analysis of spectrophotometry on the actual tilma as well as the fibers of maguey in general. And the fibers of maguey or agave, which were roughly put together in the 1500s, it's a natural fiber and they should disintegrate within 20 to 30 years. Now we have the tilma and it's still like if it was the same that day. So that's also one thing. And then I believe the tilma itself maintains a 98 degrees Fahrenheit, like the body temperature. And it's
really?
sitting behind, and it's sitting behind, well, according to them, right? According to the actual analysis, it's sitting in that frame. And whenever they try to measure the temperature on it, it's a constant 98 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's so interesting. I
and
think
pigments didn't have any like known elements on the periodic table. That was another thing. I think they measured the pigments and they couldn't decipher what elements it was.
Yeah, I think Nick and I encountered that as well, that the threads, like they sent them out for testing and there was no mineral or like vegetable dye, no periodic element. They're just colored. That was the scientific conclusion.
Right.
They're just colored. Right? So again, like definitely probably not a painting. Also too, I learned with the agave plant fibers that there's actually like the way that they weave it, it's really hard to weave it. So it's quite like you could see through it. Like the little squares that are left as a result of weaving, like you could literally see through. So, I mean, it would be super hard to paint on something like that without treating it chemically or priming it in like some way or like mounting it on another canvas. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty impossible.
At least for the details that we're going to get into, that in and of itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nick, you wanted to bring up something about
Was this the slide that you wanted?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did. I'm going to see if maybe I could pull it up on my end just to show an image also. But on this, I'm assuming none of you probably actually know what's supposed to be depicted on this thing. Like, was there a description or is there anything known about like what these babies are holding actually?
You know
like,
what?
I didn't know if maybe Teresa, if maybe you happen to know, or if Lisa.
No, I didn't actually look into like the angels really surrounding her. I do know that at some point in paintings, maybe not on, I don't think on necessarily the original, but on paintings, things have been added over history. Like when people copy it and then like show it in another part of the world, they added at some point a crown. And then they took it away, and then like different angelic things, and then they took it away. And so I'm not exactly sure. But did you?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
Because of the two babies on the right, one's holding a mirror, and the other one, I don't know what that's holding in its hand, but for some reason it made me think of Hathor. And Hathor is associated with playing this instrument. She is associated with this instrument and the mirror. And you had the baby at the top was holding a mirror and holding something. I mean, it didn't necessarily look much like this, but a little bit. It's just, I don't know what the hell that was supposed to be. But when I first saw it, I definitely thought of this image, kind of in a sense, especially with the mirror right above it. And she was associated with that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting to point out. That's cool. I think like sometimes when I've come across like different research on the apparitions and like other topics, I'm sure that that has significance. Like every single thing that those little cherubim or angels are holding is that probably significant, because I think maybe my interpretation of that would be they're trying to show that like she is supreme above other female deities in some way, you know?
Yeah, with
That they're
this,
almost like in service to her or something like this, you know?
yeah, actually, in a sense, and then to like finish off with like even the other one on the left with the tower. I mean, that kind of does go back to a little bit of a tarot card. I do even think that could be like the physical appearance of the male energy. And kind of like, in my opinion, looking at all of those four babies, sight inform her, sound inform her. This realm or male energy rising inform her. Fire, I mean, I don't know if that's a flame or whatever. I just think that even all of those is showing that she is the goddess that puts all that in form into this reality that we see.
Yeah.
Which, going back to the Tepeyac Hill, the deity that was worshipped that had a pyramid on there, she was of rising from the fire. So yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a
would-
tower in her hand. Is that like a flame in the other kid's hand rising from the fire? Maybe, I don't know, but just
Yeah.
stuff that I thought like going along with like other occult symbolism, and like even you go back to even to the eye series. How many times have I said, joking around, that little guy on the bottom is like Atlas holding up the world when it's showing you the eyeball, and you got the same shit here with the same little dude with his hands up like this.
That's right.
Yeah, look at him.
Yeah.
For the eyeball
That's
stuff.
true.
Yeah.
Oh man.
The one that I
That's
said was
awesome.
Stewie's. It was Stewie.
Yes, exactly.
Or like in other ways, sometimes it's drawn. It almost looks like a table. It's like, you know, it's very.
I know.
I've wondered if that's like the table they always show in Twin Peaks, that has the part of the ring that's supposed to fit the rest of it.
One thing, two things about this image. So the crown you were mentioning, they had painted it on 17 years after, in 1548. It was the year that Juan Diego and the Archbishop died. So they both died in the same year, 17 years later, right? So they painted this crown, and apparently the paint falls off. It doesn't stay on. So they attempt to repaint it again in 1675. It falls off again. And I think they painted again in 1745, and it falls off again, and they just stop. But yeah, they tried painting the crown 3 times, and the paint just kept falling off. So that was I thought that was funny. And then with the angel at the base, so the angel himself or herself, whatever, is holding the actual mantle or the veil, and then the dress, and that is symbolic of heaven and earth and how they're, the go-between, right? The both things. One of the things that I found really, really interesting was that the Aztecs do not have any kind of angel symbolism in their belief system. It doesn't exist for them, but they have symbolism for butterflies. So when they saw the wings, they associated that with butterflies. And the butterfly in Aztec lore represents the women who died in childbirth, that they come back to carry the souls of warriors to their resting place. And so specifically monarch butterflies, which I found was really interesting, they believe that those are the actual souls of children who have died and come back to help guide the dead back to their homeland. And the reason they say the children and the monarch is because on November 2nd, which is All Souls Day, that's when the monarchs show up to this area. They migrate and they land around this time frame. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, because you see butterflies and serpents all throughout Mesoamerica on all their stuff. So it was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an incredible connection. Oh my goodness.
Something I wanted to add too real quick with this image that I was just seeing now. And it was really just the things around. You see how she has her hands like that? And then those other things there, I guess it's like, rolled up or whatever. For some reason, that just made me think of chains or cuffs. And then I started to think about how they're... I know it's just on the Golden Dawn deck. I can't speak on other ones. I'm sure definitely not the Thoth deck. the Lover's card, has a female image on a rock that same size, but she's chained to it like this. And there's a little guy flying down with a sword. You know, you got this little guy underneath her, but like, I wonder, is this like part of the same story? You know what I'm saying? Or there's a different stage of like the same thing. Yeah.
With
like a continuation of that.
Yeah, with the arms like open like that, and in that image, Nick, is it like piercing her chest or anything like that?
Oh no, look, it looks like I mean, my opinion on that card is like a little quite different than most people, but like it looks like he's coming to save her. In a sense, I also wonder, is it also like there's like snakes coming out of the ground, but I also wonder, is it like kind of like damsel in distress type being fooled?
I was gonna
as well?
say the way you described it reminded me either of like a depiction of an ecstasy of the saints, you know, sometimes when they depict that, or sometimes in Catholic imagery, like the Seven Sorrows of Mary, where she like has her heart like literally pierced with like a sword or a dagger, right? Yeah, something I wanted to add, you touched on, Lisa, about her different skin colors in the image. So actually that was sort of researched by actually the University of Florida, I think in the 1960s. So they actually termed it like the optical effect of diffraction, which we find in nature on like butterfly wings again. So the butterfly, or like, you know, bird feathers. Sometimes you look at a bird and it's like purple, but then it's like blue or like green, right? So depending on the angle. So yeah, her skin color actually appears differently depending on how you're viewing it. So like you said, up close, she appears more whiter. And
Jewish,
then,
yeah.
And then from a distance, let's call her like Persian.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. And then from a distance, her skin actually appears darker or maybe more like Aztec, right?
Yes.
Which I just like think that's so fascinating.
Which is really neat that they did that it was able to kind of come through with that image.
Yeah, absolutely. And according to the Florida team's analysis, the surface of the tilma actually sort of has like a photographic film on it.
Oh, wow.
Like they, not like an actual film, but that's sort of like the texture, I guess. So while the outside is very delicate, the inner part is rough, as if sort of like Polaroid picture. You know, like in a Polaroid, the film is like floppy, and then like the structure is like inside, right? And then the back is like floppy again. So, I mean, it's pretty cool to me. And that reminded me of like the Shroud of Turin, because I think that's the only other specimen that we have historically that seems to have been affected by like light, or it's just like within the fabric itself. It's not added externally. It's just something that's come from within or from a supernatural source, right?
Like an imprint,
and left an imprint of sorts. So, I mean, it's interesting. It just like defies the properties of physics.
I think so. I think so, for sure.
There's sorry, just to finish.
No,
up.
go ahead.
There's what's her name? Like an art historian. Her name is Laura Irene Castillo Basurto, from Mexico, and she is like investigates canvases and is a very highly renowned art historian. And she actually said in a quote, "In this matter, science is helpless. It is not possible to explain it even by invoking the laws of nature and all the knowledge that is available to man. It simply had no right to occur." I love that quote. That's pretty crazy.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Sorry, what were you going to say before, Lisa?
No. I was just, I was going to ask if you wanted to go into some of the garments. That's all. But I didn't know if you want to go through the slides.
Oh, can I say one more thing about that image?
Yeah,
and something that you had mentioned, Teresa. It was because you mentioned it. Because you mentioned it, and it made me start thinking about it. I was like, wait, where is this tarot card again?
Go for it.
When I was talking about the Lover's card and talking about how like she was like that, and the guy coming down. And then you mentioned, which I've even used before and posted about, the image of Mary with the swords going into her heart.
Yes.
That I have, said that is a common image for like Binah, or kind of like this scarlet whore, but like up by Saturn on the tree of life. So like it made me think of that, and then I'm thinking of like the guy flying with the sword. The guy flying with the sword does fall on the path from. It goes from Tiferet, which is the sun, which does have the image of a child, can be used for that, and it's gold, which is on here again. It is that path going from the sun to that Binah, or where you were talking about the image with all the swords in a heart. So, I mean, it almost kind of makes sense how you have a guy with a sword heading in that direction anyway.
Right. Actually, yeah, that's a really good connection. Later on, when we move on to some stuff that I have, actually, I feel like it really connects to the tree of life. Actually, so we'll get into that. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's really cool. Amazing. And yeah, we can totally get into wherever you want to go next, Lisa, with it.
I'm gonna take you through her garments. If you don't mind. Take us on a trip. There you go. So she has three main garments, and each one is white, red, or crimson, or pink. White, pink, red, crimson, adjacent, and blue, green-ish, right? Mm-hmm. So the first garment is the one closest to her, is the white garment, and we can tell that it's white based on the cuffs around her wrist and then the straight collar. The cuffs around her wrist have, and this reminds me of what you just said, Nick, has the gold frill to it, almost like gold, not chains, but gold like symbolism or chains around the wrist, right? But for Aztecs, it meant royalty, because only royalty wore gold. And then we'll get into some more gold that she does wear. So that was one of their things that it's indicated to them that she was not just a regular woman. She was actually of some sort of royalty connection. The other thing was that at the straight collar, she had a brooch, right? And it would be the only iconography that was not Aztec or was not reflective of the indigenous people of that. And it was a cross. But the cross itself was found on the priests that were there giving and teaching and evangelizing. So again, you see the bridging of the two cultures, right? The two belief systems. So that in and of itself, I thought was, and then white meaning purity, chastity, indicating that she's a virgin and whatnot.
Yeah. That's really cool.
And then the next one was the one on top of the white garment, and that one was considered like a red, crimson, pinkish garment, and it's the dress itself. And what's interesting about this, what they had said, was that it has like an embroidered gold lace overlay on top of the red crimson dress. And the reason they think that is because the overlay doesn't follow the folds of the actual red dress. So if you think about Middle Eastern women who wear that gold overlay on top of their silk, that's almost like the same effect to where she's wearing some sort of gold overlay, again with the gold indicating royalty, indicating a bridge between Aztec, Middle Eastern, and Christian. The other thing was, for Aztecs, red meant earth. So that indicated that she was human. Red is also associated with volcanoes or volcanic rock, which in Aztec belief system, volcanoes are open wounds in the earth. And they believe that the wound is associated with the goddess of the earth. And then also the soil around volcanoes themselves is some of the most extremely fertile and rich soils. And so further indicating her fertility, her stance in fertility, that she was of, ability to, and we'll get into that later, to procreate, right? Mm-hmm. And another thing I attached here, the tribe, the people further down the road in the Yucatan, Mayans, they would cover their dead in cinnabar, which is red, to indicate that they were putting them back into the earth. So also red associated with earth.
Wow, that's really interesting. Actually, can I just interject for a second?
Please.
Because what you're saying about the earth imagery and the red soil and whatnot. So actually, where is it here? I believe it's in 1988. So like many, many years later, with all the improvements in technology and whatnot, they can always do different tests that they couldn't do many years ago. So there was a priest, his name, I believe, was Father Rojas, and he became really intrigued with the layout of the flowers on her garment. And he was like, maybe there's some sort of like intentional pattern with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he actually placed a map of Mexico on the image and then lined up the flower of the sun, which is one of the types of flowers on her garment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a symbol of divinity and transcendence, which is actually, it's located like she is pregnant in the image. I don't know if we touched on that earlier.
Not yet.
Right.
But yes, we will.
So the flower is on her womb, and he lined it up with Tepeyac Hill, where the apparitions occurred. And then he also lined up the flower on her right sleeve of her tunic and found that it corresponds with, I'm going to totally butcher this, Itzzachuatl volcano. The left flower corresponds with Popocatépetl volcano, and the one under her neck corresponds with La Malinque volcano. The one on her right arm corresponds to the summit of Cerro de Signualta. Sorry, I'm so bad at this. And the one on her head corresponds with Pico de Orizaba. The gold encircled brooch under her neck corresponds with the summit of Nuacampapetl, which is called the place of the four mountains. And I think it's a four-petaled brooch,
flower,
like a flower on the brooch, which is pretty crazy. Actually, I think I have a slide about it that I can flip to in a second. Sorry, Lisa, I'm messing up.
No. Go right ahead.
Oh, there it is.
We'll go back and forth.
There we go. Yeah, so there's the image laid out, which I actually I put it vertical as well on the slide because I'm like, doesn't that not look like the tree of life?
Oh, you know what that reminds me of too?
Yeah.
I've seen people try to show that I think Oak Island may have the tree of life on it, and it looks a lot like.
Yo, that's crazy.
Wow,
the way this
I didn't even think of that.
So, okay, 20 years later, after Father Rojas' discovery, so in 2008, not that long ago, a Mexican mathematician, Professor Fernando Ojeda Yanes, he decided to verify the findings, see if he could like recreate the finding, I guess. And he did discover that the priest's intuition was right, but the method was a little bit flawed. Because he said it was only about 70% accurate. But using Google Earth, he then aligned a map of Mexico on the image a little bit differently. So the flower, I believe the one on her womb, he then corresponded to Star Mountain, which is one of the most important geographical points for the Aztecs.
Yes.
It was also the summit of the solar deity in their beliefs. And that the solar deity priests observed whether the sun would rise for the next cycle on that summit. When it rose, the Aztec priests would light fires as a sign that the world would continue to exist. In the current day, Stations of the Cross are now celebrated on that summit on Good Friday. And the way that this professor in 2008 aligned the image, it gave even more amazing results with about 92.9% accuracy in aligning the flowers with the different summits in Mexico. And I mean, like, no cartographer in the 16th century would have been able to do that, I think. Like,
exactly.
To create such precision within an image, it's pretty incredible. So I think it just, like, speaking to what you mentioned about the volcanoes before, and them being so symbolic to the culture, it seems like the Lady of Guadalupe is literally, like, part of the Mexican landscape. Like,
no, absolutely. Like, like her navel is part of their main thing. And to your point of the 4-petal flower, I got something. Yeah. So this is a 4-petal flower that is found throughout some of the Aztec ruins, and it's called Nahual Olin. I think you mentioned that. And so this 4-petal flower was found, like you said, the Pyramid of the Sun, and it's found in the natural cave under the pyramid, not inside, but underneath the actual pyramid that has 4 chambers, hence the 4 petals. And it's the whole concept of the universe, that this is where God resides, the cosmological symbolism depicting the four movements of what they call the four movements of the sun, but it's really the four seasons, right?
Yep.
And it's interesting that it was strategically placed over her womb, because if this is the flower of the sun and the flower is on her womb, it indicates that this is the sun god child, right?
Yeah,
like I am the light, I am the way, follow me. You know what I mean? Like that whole.
And again, bridging the two belief systems, right? And also, I think the heart has four chambers, right?
Yes, it does.
That's pretty cool.
It does.
Wild.
So, yeah. And on her red vestment, there's 3 types of flowers. So the 4-petal flower is one of them, and that's the only one that's there on her navel area, which is interesting because that map that you showed, that whole area was called Mexica, and that indicates belly button of the moon lake.
Oh.
And so if you look at the lake itself, apparently it looks like the shadow on the moon.
What?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I was laughing because my cousin in Sicily used to call the town where we're from the belly button of the world. That's me.
Oh, that's funny.
So when you brought up belly button, I was like, oh man, that's jokes. Sorry.
Yes.
Side note.
Yes.
That's hilarious.
So I'm going to, do you mind if I go really quickly on the flowers on the red? Okay.
Yes.
So the other flower they have is called Flower Hills, and it's these kind of like not oblong, like these type of pine cone looking type flowers themselves. And granted, not everybody was like greatly, I don't know, inclined to draw, I guess, I don't know. But they say that it alludes to the pictograph or the glyph for the mountain in Aztec lore. But it also, in and of itself, it alludes to the heart, and it alludes to a flower that is native to that area. So there's 9 of these golden flowers, this one specifically. And if you lay the image of these 9 flowers itself, it also touches the 9 mountains that are also geographically located around this moon lake, so to speak. And I think you have to lay it down at 19.5 northern latitude or something like that. It's some whatever. This was, kind of just briefly read that I didn't really, understand how they laid it down or anything like that. But the actual glyph itself is from the codices indicating sacred mountain or sacred hill. And so these 9 are revered, and then you see the 9 flowers on her actual dress itself. Wow. I went ahead and I took the liberty of looking up the altitude on these 9 mountains, and they're all at 7,000 feet, which I thought that was weird. 7, I don't know. Weird. And so Mexica means navel of the moon. And so, but so the other thing that I was going to.
Swords in the heart too again.
Yes, exactly.
What was it? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Well, you have the 7 swords through the heart again that we
mentioned
before.
Right? There we go. Yes. Sorrows again.
And if you turn this flower upside down, it looks just like a heart with veins and arteries coming out of it. Yes, so the whole heart symbolism is there also. They also say that it is analogous to the Mexican magnolia. And the Mexican magnolia was used in Aztec like herbal remedies, and it was only reserved for royalty. So, type of.
That's interesting. It almost looks like the fleur-de-lis too. Like while it's upright like that, sort of similar to the fleur-de-lis. Interesting. Which again, associated with royalty, of course.
Right. And then the other flower that she had was the Venus flower. And that one is the 8-petaled flower. And so it has 4 round, 4 thin, symbol of Venus, and it's the morning star for them. It appears 8 times on the dress, and it is also the symbol of Quetzalcoatl. Before he left, he told them that white men were coming. They were coming from the Orient, and that it would put all the gods in place when that person arrives, or when that deity arrives. So she brings the white god from the Orient and puts others in place herself, right? Like she kind of speaks of the god. But that was another, the glyphs themselves show the flower with the 8 petals. So that was also part of the actual makeup of the dress.
Yeah, that's crazy. Jeez.
One thing I did also want to add, you know how like you have like that, I don't know what you want to call that, kind of like a moon wane or whatever. That
Mm-hmm.
that whatever.
The crescent?
Yeah,
The
the
moon.
crescent. Yeah,
Yeah,
I couldn't
the
remember
crescent.
the crescent on the bottom. Thoth and Isis both are depicted with that above their head.
Yes. And it's very Arabic also.
So I mean, you got a
Yes,
male and a
yes.
female right there again, with that symbol being
Yes.
used at the same time.
I think, I don't remember when it was, but I'm glad you brought that up, Nick, because I think on a episode of some sort a long time ago, we were talking about that, the crescent, and then maybe it was with the Nubian cult. I don't know. And then it hit me
Probably.
that like maybe it's not a crescent moon, it's actually like an eclipse,
That's what I think. Yeah,
right? Like a sliver of what you
that's
see.
that's how I've explained seeing it like that.
Right? Like it's not necessarily just the moon by itself, but like the sun eclipsing the moon or vice versa, I guess, right? Pretty wild.
Yes, yes. And I believe that's what they were saying. Like she's stepping on the navel of the moon and then she appears in the navel of the moon lake, you know, so it was
Appropriate.
Mhm.
I think too also in Revelation there is a passage about Mary crushing the head of the serpent.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
she, it's referred to as she. I don't, and the woman in the sky with the crown and, well, sorry, I'm butchering the verse, but people know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that she's crushing the head of the serpent. And I think it's only in like a couple translations where it indicates that it's a she.
Okay.
Not, I don't think it's in every translation, but I just think it's interesting that often the crescent is also associated with like, you know, certain belief systems or certain deities, and then it's like she's literally like just stepping on it.
Yes. Yes.
Power
No.
move, I guess.
No, for sure. For
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
And then the last the last garment that I was gonna see is the green blue garment, the mantle that she's wearing.
Mhm.
And so this is the same exact color as a quetzalcoatl bird or the quetzal bird. The quetzal bird has iridescent feathers, and it's considered the most sacred bird in Aztec belief system, and I believe in Mesoamerica in general. And it's the same color as the rainforest. To them, the rainforest was paradise because in paradise, birds were constantly singing for joy. Flowers were constantly blooming. You didn't have to hunt for food. I mean, because everything was either growing on a tree or abundant in the rivers. And so what emperors would put quetzal bird feathers in their actual headdress and wear them, right? That was the actual attire for the emperor themselves.
Wow.
And because of the iridescence of the feathers, it gave it like the actual like legitimate effect of this, you know, blue, green, never looking the same color. Well, when you look at this mantle, it is exactly the color of that blue-green iridescent, so that when you take a picture of it, no matter where you're standing in reference to the actual frame, it's never the same color. And I believe that they had said something like when the image was taken to Europe, they changed the color to blue and white. But that would have been wrong, because if you would have left it blue, then that would have indicated water. And that's not what that was. It was, she was indicating that she was, you know, the whole Quetzalcoatl, the Quetzal bird, and then the emperor's wearing the headdress itself. And so it fit perfectly, that because I believe the Quetzal bird was, you know, the whole paradise. And then she's wearing the red, which meant earth. And then of course the white, which is celestial. So, or virgin rather. And so you have all of this layered symbology on just her three garments.
Yeah, it's wild. It's really deep.
Yeah.
I know it's also too crazy to make the connection, you know, between Quetzalcoatl and the Masonic orders, and I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Something
I mean,
to think about.
I think also people see this and then take it on as their own, you know, and they morph it into their own belief system. I think Nick and I have talked about that. You know, these people are referring to something and people take it on as a regular God when they're actually being metaphorical about a God.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. And I have to say, this is one of like the more unique, I think, depictions of Mary. Because I've never seen her in another image wear a color like this. Usually it's like a different kind of blue, often, or white. This being like that kind of more teal, greeny blue. It's obviously like
turquoise, jade.
Yeah, to make a statement to the local people, obviously.
Yes, I think so. I think so
that
too.
is really interesting. If you guys don't mind, I was going to add some stuff about the constellations that appear on her. So I think I'll just skip to the slide. Or is it? Oh, I lost my screen. There we go. All right. Perfect. So just going off of what you were talking about, Lisa, like we were mentioning with the volcanoes, like she seems to be so a part of the Mexican landscape. That same priest, Father Rojas, who I mentioned before, he also decided to see if he could make a connection to the stars and her garment. So he worked with an astronomer, Dr. Juan Romero Hernandez Yescas, to help him out. And their investigations happened in 1981. And they discovered that the arrangement of the stars on the image resembled the star systems that would have been stretched over Mexico in December 1531 when the apparitions occurred. So the stars in the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe correspond exactly with how the sky would have looked above Mexico around 6 to 6:45 a.m. on that day, which is pretty wild.
Which was 12/12, which was December 12th. So it would have been 12/12.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I believe it was also, according to the Julian calendar, the winter solstice.
Yes.
So an even more like, auspicious day, and obviously indicating, the days therein get longer from that point on, from death to life again and rebirth and whatnot. So then we can always connect that symbolism too. So they were saying through their research that if, they were pinpointing it that it must be the exact moment when Juan Diego opened his tilma in front of the bishop.
Right.
If it had been a few minutes later or earlier, the sky would have looked different.
Right.
So they kind of like corresponded with the documents that Nick mentioned before, the historical accounts, and they were trying to figure out like when would he have appeared in front of the bishop, and they are inferring from the image that it must have been around that time in the morning, like 6:45 a.m. around there, which is pretty cool.
That is.
So some of the constellations that connect to the image is the Corona Borealis constellation, the Northern Crown, which is adorned above her head, which of course is significant in Aztec culture, and it corresponds with the constellation of Virgo around her heart, Gemini at her knees, and as I mentioned, it was the winter solstice, so awakening from death to life. With modern software, it's also been confirmed that the locations of the 12 constellations in the image, 7 of them correspond 100% with a map above Mexico at 6:45 a.m. on the day of December 12th, 1531. And the remaining 5 constellations in question correspond in the high 90%. So, I mean, it's pretty friggin'
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is. That's pretty close.
Yeah, and I think that will be a nice segue into what Nick was going to talk about with the music, because it also corresponded perfectly with musical notes. And if it had been a little bit different in timing, it would not have been a nice melody. Let's put it that way. It would have been really different. So if you could take us through that, Nick, that would be amazing.
Yeah, it's I don't have much on here, but there is like somebody who did find the way of getting music out of it. Supposedly, you can find music in Our Lady of Guadalupe's mantle. Mathematical accountant Fernando Ojeda made the discovery. In quotations, the Instituto Superior de Estudios Guadalupanos, whatever the name of this place, gives me the mission of studying the image by applying the only science that had not been done before in image studies, mathematics. Mexico resident and mathematical accountant Fernando said. And then he also says, by previous studies made to the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, I reasoned the following. If the stars of the mantle are the constellations of the sky at the time of its impregnation, the dress represents proportionally the main hills and volcanoes of the orography, however you say that, of Mexico. If the whole image keeps the golden ratio, then it has perfect symmetry. Therefore, it has music. And he points out that it goes back to Pythagoras, pointed out that where there is perfect symmetry, there is music. As their positions were different, I considered that each star, according to its position, and each flower center, according to its position, was a certain musical note. He placed the image inside the drawing of a golden rectangle. A music expert then superimposed the drawing of a piano and documented the notes expressed by each point of the flowers and stars. And then you do end up getting some music out of it, which is pretty wild and interesting stuff. If you were probably go look it up, you could easily find it. But it is...
yeah, you can find it on YouTube. For sure.
I mean, it sounds like it would be music.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of Hildegard.
Yes.
It reminds me It reminds me of these occultists who put everything encompassing together, including music. Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually listened to it this morning, the melody, and you can find it on YouTube. Like if you just type in Our Lady of Guadalupe mantle music or whatever. And that was my thought, that it sounded like the music of Saint Hildegard. It's very like celestial, heavenly, like goes along with like what very ethereal. Exactly, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. But yeah, it's really beautiful. So I think that's a pretty wild discovery. And Nick, did you have anything else on it that you wanted to add?
No, that was it. Just that little thing on the music.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Something that I wanted to bring up before we start to kind of like conclude and stuff. What slide is it here? Sorry.
One thing that I find is interesting is that a lot of the polymaths, when they were getting into, I mean, I hate that we even have to use the word occultism for it, but when they were like, I guess like trying to figure out spiritual beliefs or ideas, a lot of them included like music within their ways of trying to express an idea. And I mean, and even in that image, I mean, technically you're also showing, the constellations. Is that another part of the polymath? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, could the person who have even had this image or who created this been a
remember with Michael Meyer, his emblems, it was an all-encompassing experience. It was everything. And the music itself was the auditorial involvement of the senses.
Yeah, and that was the same thing Hildegard did too. Certain music was supposed to be played with, I think, certain hymns or things of hers.
Yeah,
like
agreed.
Like multi-sensory, multidisciplinary, right? All encompassing. So because the three of us worked on the I series, I thought that we did, of course, on the Occult Rejects. I thought this was interesting to include. So there's a ton of information actually on what you can see in her pupil. Like this is how detailed we're getting now. Of course, that technology has improved over the years. But apparently even with like a magnifying glass, I think in 1929, it was first discovered that in the upper part of the lady's right iris, you can see a bearded man. But at the time, that was not made public because there was a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment in Mexico, which, again, connects to what I mentioned in the beginning with like a lot of what surrounds these Marian apparitions is to do with warning about communism and Marxism. So in Mexico, I believe at the time, there was quite a Marxist movement. And a lot of the Catholics in the region were fighting against that. So just to protect themselves, they didn't really make a big deal out of this discovery at the time. But in 1951, a photographer took a photo of the image and then analyzed it with a magnifying glass. The Archbishop of Mexico at the time then set up a scientific commission to examine the phenomenon. And basically, it was a team of like Mexican ophthalmologists. They discovered that the eyes actually react like those of a live person when examined, which is pretty wild. They discerned the image of the bearded man in both irises. So it's as if she's looking at something and you're seeing reflected in her pupil what she is looking at, which is pretty crazy. Let's see.
One thing I want to add, just for the listeners or the people watching it, if you were to go like look up the videos and stuff on this, you'll see a lot better detail, and it's much more convincing than the pics that are up. I just want to say that, you know, when I watched it, I was like,
that is true.
I was like, this is actually pretty convincing.
Yes, I mean those images are,
and
just
like even showing the way
idea.
that they even find it. Like, aren't they? I don't know. Like they're using like these like different types of ways of like reading the image, right?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, they use different, of course, like ophthalmological instruments and whatnot to do these examinations, of course.
I think like what they use to do this, if I'm correct, has been done on other paintings as well. And they're finding out, like I've even brought it up in one other show, I think, before, that they're finding like some pictures are actually stuffed over something else.
Right. Yeah, like
purposely. It's like obviously purposely done.
Yes.
Yeah, that paintings have been covered up over time, and they discover it with those instruments, right? Yeah, so they discovered in their examination that the pupils actually were lit up with a diffused light, which gave the impression of a concave surface, which this would be impossible to achieve as an artist on a flat surface, apparently.
Yes.
Which I find
it almost
really interesting.
To make you wonder if there was like high tech actually used behind this stuff.
What do you mean?
Like the creation of these things. Like, did we actually like? Maybe we still knew how to do like things that we do now, but just in a more natural way. You know what I'm saying? In a sense, and like, it just took a lot more time. You had to do it yourself. You didn't have the convenience of technology doing it for you.
When people were actually in touch with themselves to create versus
like
someone else.
I don't know. I mean, to start thinking about like that, we got to use technology of today to see these stuff that's behind the painting. They had to have the technology to make it look like, you know what I'm saying, to do that in a sense then.
Yeah. Well, I think
like how did you make it naked to the, naked to our eye, but yet knowing it was good, but I would think you're using the same technology to see what you're doing to make it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Why would you even spend that much detail and effort into the eye itself if the technology didn't even exist back then? Nobody was even going to see it back then to actually do that much. If not, why so much detail? Really?
Yeah. Well, I think that conclusion of that test speaks to like the probable supernatural origin of the image, because then they did the same tests on copies of the image, so like paintings and photographs and whatnot, and they found that that light reflection does not occur in the copies, only in the original on the tilma. So it's pretty amazing. It indicates that her eyes were like a live human eyes of a person. What else can I say about it? There's a lot, but I'll try to condense it a little bit. Yeah, so just to give you an idea, the diameter of her irises are only 5/16 of an inch. So like to be able to include that level of detail as a painter, I think it's pretty impossible.
Yeah.
And no one, like you said, Nick, no one even was able to notice it for 400 years. Right? So it's pretty crazy.
Like it was there waiting.
It was just there waiting to be discovered, right? Which is pretty wild. And then in 1979, Jose Aste Tonsman, who's a German by origin, but then he moved to Mexico later on. He was able to enlarge the image 2,000 times and discovered even more scenes in the irises that could be observed. So he was granted access to the original image, took high quality photos himself to be able to be analyzed under high magnification. Tonsman noticed there's not only the bearded man in the image, but also 12 other people. And in my head, I was like, ooh, 12 apostles? But no, I don't think so. I think it's whatever she was looking at at the moment when when Juan Diego opened the tilma, and it would have been whoever was standing with him, that it was literally like her point of view.
Yeah.
As like a live person, as if she was really there. So it's pretty crazy. It's a group scene. They identified in the image like some people who would have been probably like Aztec ethnicity, the bishop, the bearded man, probably like Juan Diego. That's what they were sort of deducing from their research, which is, I think, pretty amazing, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I believe they said that when they looked at both eyes, the both eyes were not identical in their image. They actually reflected what you would actually, like when you're looking at something from the side, one side of the eye sees the full image of what you're seeing versus the other eye has like not partial, but half or like a tilted version of what that eye is seeing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what you're getting at, Lisa, is that like stereoscopic vision.
Yes. Thank you. For saying
So when you see, when your eyes see something, it makes two images, but then the brain makes it into one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. They did find that in her irises, which is, I think, pretty wild. So if you guys don't have anything else, I'll go into sort of like the legacy of things, if that's cool.
Go for it.
One more thing, like in terms of that, the aura of her.
Yeah.
That's indicative of the sun. You see straight lines and then wavy lines. And that is actually symbolic of heat and light of the sun itself. And the yellow obviously indicating the sun itself. But you also see, so these are the rays, right, of the image. But you also see that specific type of straight wavy line on shields, indicating lineage of genealogy and bloodlines of royalty.
Oh, shit. No
and
way.
then she's standing in front of it, indicating that she is larger than the sun. But with her gaze down, she's indicating that there is someone bigger than her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I did not know
So that was it. That was all I.
Yeah. I think also,
wanted to say about
too, you just reminded me from what you were saying, Lisa, that in the top right corner of the image, I think there was a spill at some point through someone that was cleaning the frame that the tilma is in. They were polishing it and they spilled like acid nitrate on it. So, I mean, that should burn a hole like immediately in this, you know, hundreds of years old agave fabric garment. It should have really damaged it severely, but it didn't. And the person even apparently tried to rub it out, which would have just like should have disintegrated the fabric.
Yeah.
But it didn't. It did minimal damage. And then actually over time, it's like healed itself. It's gotten better. So it's like minimal. So yeah, I'll just go into a little bit of like the modern stuff regarding the apparition. So basically, Juan Diego, he ended up becoming a saint in the Catholic Church. I don't know if people know that, but for the rest of his life after the apparitions, he lived in a hut next to the church that ended up being built to honor Mary and the apparitions. He took care of pilgrims who came to the shrine. He was buried in the church, and his tilma, of course, can still be seen in what is known now as the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe. His existence has been questioned, of course, because it seems a very like mythical story, right? So it's been questioned, but was confirmed by the Vatican. Take that for what you want. And Juan Diego was beatified on May 6th, 1990, and then canonized on July 31st, 2002. So really not that long ago, by Pope John Paul II. Numerous miracles have been attributed to him, and he remains one of the most popular saints in Mexico, of course. And when these things happen, like these apparitions, people, I think, should know that the Catholic Church doesn't like jump on it right away. They're actually like super skeptical most of the time. And it takes like years and years for these things to be approved, right? So yes, this apparition did become approved later on in 1754 under Pope Benedict the 14th. I think that is in Roman numerals. And then that's when the proper feast day and masses would be offered on December 12th as like the commemorative day of the apparitions. Pope Pius X proclaimed Our Lady of Guadalupe the patroness of Latin America in 1910. And then also Pope Pius XI granted her patronage over the Philippines in 1935, which is interesting too, because Filipinos obviously have a strong Spanish and like Latin heritage also. So it's gone across the ocean, which is pretty cool. And yeah, of course, this spread throughout Mexico by word of the Jesuits and other religious people. The miraculous image and apparitions are responsible for the conversion of millions of Mexicans. And the image has also become synonymous with pro-life causes. Because as we mentioned earlier in the episode, the Virgin actually is pregnant in the image, not greatly, but
well, and the black I forgot to mention the black belt cincture that indicates in Aztec lore that they're pregnant.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. I forgot to mention that.
That's
Sorry.
cool.
Yeah.
No worries. That is a really interesting detail. I did not know that. So yeah, on April 24th, 2007, that is the day that abortion was legalized in Mexico, actually. And a mass was offered at the Guadalupe Shrine for unborn children on that day. And during that mass, a very intense light appeared on the tilma in her womb area. And it actually looked like the outline of a human embryo. So that's on the slide in the top right area. That's the tilma in the frame.
Oh, wow.
And then that lit up image is where her womb would be. That's pretty crazy.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah, right? I know. It's a more modern kind of miracle. So it lasted about an hour and people were photographing and filming it. There's lots of footage of it. People who have analyzed the footage as experts say it was not a reflection and there's no backlit illumination, so they can't really explain it, which is pretty crazy, I think. Of course, there's the shrine as she requested to be built, so it was built. And it's become a really special place of holy sites around the world. It's actually, I was surprised to learn it's the most frequently visited pilgrimage center with over 20 million people visiting every year.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa. For comparison, like Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris gets 13.5 million. St. Peter's in Rome gets 7 million. So this is like double that. That's wild. And just another, like, there's so many miracles, of course, associated with this, but one that I thought was interesting, just to tie it back to like Mary often coming in warning of Marxism and communism. There was, of course, the very well-known Mexican painter Diego Rivera, who was the husband of Frida Kahlo. So I was like, oh, I know who Frida is. I didn't know who Diego was, but it's an interesting story. It was her husband. So they're actually in the picture in the bottom right of the slide. And he was a staunch communist. He described himself as a Stalinist. He even presented Stalin and Mao Zedong as saviors of humanity in his art. He would write the words, Dios no existe, God does not exist, on one of his well-known murals located at the Hotel del Prado. And he was even outspoken in support of like the Soviet invasion of Hungary. He was like a hardcore communist. He died in 1957, but before his death, he actually went back to the Hotel del Prado and personally painted over the words Dios no existe on his mural. So he got rid of those words. 2 days later, he called a press conference and announced that he was now a Catholic. And he published a statement in the press that he owed his conversion to his devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that he wanted to make amends to his fellow countrymen for his previous position on God and Our Lady. And shortly afterwards, he died. Which is just pretty crazy. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and really that's all I got. You know? I feel like that we packed a lot in.
Yeah, that was a lot.
I think so.
To like an hour and a half. But
I was thinking about that before
guys,
an hour. I was like, there's a lot of information.
There is, yeah. No, you did amazing. Thank you so much, guys, for helping me with this, because it would have been too much for me to do on my own.
There's actually a lot to the story, like if you want to get into it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's even more, of course. Like Lisa, you touched
Yes.
on for us graciously, like the conquistadors and the merging of the cultures. And there's so much, like even the Mexican Revolution. They use
Yes,
like
yes.
Our Lady of Guadalupe on their banner for
Yes.
independence from Spain.
Mhm.
So it's very much like a Latin Mexican symbol. I think
It is.
it's ingrained in the
Very much
culture,
so.
you know, beyond
Mhm.
religion, I would say.
Right. Right.
Right. It's even just
Right.
like a cultural thing.
That's kind of what Hispanics say. You don't know where Catholic begins and paganism ends. So,
Yeah.
at least
Yeah.
for us. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just,
Yeah.
you know, I find it fascinating to make the connections between all the different belief systems and breaking down the symbols. I hope people learn something in this, like, hopefully first installment of a little bit of a mini series on the spiritual gangsters. So, yeah. And I just, connecting conspiracy and Catholicism in a way that you don't normally hear in this space. So,
Right.
yeah, if people
true.
have questions, comments, concerns, hit us up. Let us know what you thought. And yeah, I think that's it for us.
Sounds
End of
good.
another Spiritual Gangsters. Thank you guys so much. And yeah,
Of course.
everybody stay gangster.